Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created the show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guests, we provide the knowledge, skills, insight, and inspiration you need to find you're happy. Hello there, lawyers. So for those of you who follow me on Instagram at the Happy Lawyer Project, you already know this. And for those of you who don't, you should follow me there because that's where I share all of my biggest news first. But there's an update in my life and I have officially given notice at work. So many of you have been reaching out to me, DMing me, emailing me, honing pigeons. That's not true. No one sent me pigeons, but I've been getting lots of questions. And the number one question I keep getting is, what am I doing next? I'm actually taking a sabbatical from the practice of law, and I will be doing nothing next. Yep, I don't know what I'm doing because I have no plans, and I'm completely okay with that. We have decided that we are going to take kind of a big step back to pursue something that's really important to us. So in 2 weeks from today, we are moving our kids down to Costa Rica. I know, crazy. So if you're listening to this live, 2 weeks from the day this podcast is released, we will be getting on a plane to Costa Rica with our little ones. So basically the plan right now is that we need to sell all of our stuff, get our most treasured possessions into 4 suitcases, and get on a plane. If this is something you guys are interested in knowing more about, we are going to be documenting it all, sharing all the good, the bads, the decisions, the ups, the downs over at Wild and Together on Instagram. But I know some of you are here for the lawyer goodness. So for those of you, the show will go on. I don't know in what form quite yet, and I haven't decided how to transition the show during the sabbatical, but I will let you know as soon as I do. And my intention is to continue supporting this community and continue bringing you great content. I just haven't decided exactly how I want to do that. So hang tight with me. Now let's go on to today's show. A few weeks ago, a listener DM'd me about an incident that took place at a work event. She asked me some really good questions about how to handle practicing while female and if I could do an episode on the topic. So I immediately reached out to my good friend, Michelle Brown Coughlin. She's an IP attorney in Louisville, Kentucky, and the founder and president of MothersEsquire, which is an organization committed to providing support and resources to women lawyers and their families, as well as provide training and information to law firms and legal employers about policies and practices that will help them retain valuable attorney talent during critical caregiving years. I know, it's an amazing organization, and it doesn't just support mothers, it supports women who are considering becoming mothers, it supports fathers, and really it supports the entire profession because it makes it a more inclusive space for those of us who do choose to have kids. So if you aren't already following Michelle, you should. On the show today, we chat about the state of women in the legal profession, her thoughts on the impact of the Me Too movement. She gives some great advice on the tough conversations that we need to be having, and she answers some listeners' questions. So there's tons of value in this episode, and I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project, lawyers. I am really excited about today's show. This is a lovely lady who I had the pleasure of meeting at GalCon a few months ago and whose work I followed for a long time now. So it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome Michelle Browning Coughlin to the show. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be with you today.
So for those who don't know what you do, which seems strange to me, but could you just start with a brief description of who you are and what it is that you do?
Well, I'll start with my practice first. So I'm an IP lawyer at a mid-sized regional firm in Louisville, Kentucky, Wyatt Terran Combs. I do intellectual property work, data privacy, technology agreements, that kind of legal practice. So I do have a legal practice. I'm a partner in a firm. I'm a mom of 2. I have 2 daughters, one's 14, one's 12. So I'm in the thick of parenting. And it's those 2 roles together that leads me to really what I think we're going to be talking about today, which is I'm also the founder of MothersEsquire, an organization focused on how we can address attrition rates of women lawyers, and particularly focusing on mothers. And so, as you indicated, I write and speak on the topic of gender equality in the legal profession, and particularly focusing in on something called the motherhood penalty.
So I got a message from a listener a couple weeks ago, and she reached out because she had questions about practicing as a woman in law. And you're the first person I thought of because this is obviously something you're very passionate about and something that I think you can speak to, for quite some time. So I'm really excited to dive into that. But before we go into those those deeper conversations, I'd love to know kind of how you made the decision to start Mothers Esquire and where that came from.
It's such a funny story now looking back because, now I have women who are within our group coming to me and saying how much they really appreciate the support or how they were referred a client matter and how even they've received it, they've gotten a job offer. So all of these things that have happened and they're very appreciative and which of course brings me such joy to hear those messages. But when you go back to the beginning, I was drowning. That's what I always say. I was just drowning and feeling overwhelmed with practicing law and trying to be a mother because I had my first child before I started law school and then another child during law school. So when I started practicing at a different mid-sized regional firm here in Louisville, I had 2 little kids. So that type A personality of mine that so many lawyers tend to have, driven towards perfectionism and driven towards being the best and a superstar, such conflict between trying to be this perfect, great, first year associate and this perfect mom of 2 preschool kids. Or one kid who was in school and one who was in preschool. And just the conflict of the messages that were playing inside of my head. And I would say to people, I'm an A+ person doing a C job at everything. And I just felt this sense of never being enough, never doing enough. And I thought, I looked around and I thought, I just don't see a lot of other moms practicing. And when there was a mom practicing, it wasn't long until she moved to a different role. And I just didn't see a path forward. And I thought, I cannot be the only one who is feeling this sense of overwhelm at trying to balance these multiple roles and multiple expectations. So I tried to reach out to a few moms that I knew who I knew were also lawyers in town in Louisville. And I said, let's just make this little group that we can connect with each other. And, so I created this group and I added 4 or 5 friends and, really to help give me support, to give me somebody to connect to. And now, we're nearing 4,000 members across the nation, some international members even, of women who felt that same or some similar kind of feeling where they wanted to have somebody to connect to. They wanted to see other people going down the same path as them and balancing the same things as them. And it's just become this great community of support and then now advocacy work. It's just been such an interesting evolution of the group from me starting out saying I need a community to then being a part of this just incredible community of women lawyers.
To be honest, I don't even know how you find time. It's such a
lot of insomnia.
What came first, the group or the insomnia? Which led to
I'm not sure.
And so the thing that I find so powerful about what you're doing is that you wanted to create this community or you needed this community and you decided to go out and create it. And I think so many people get stuck in that place where they know what they need, but they're just so overwhelmed that they don't know how to ask for the help. And you went out and you did that. And now that it's kind of evolved into this thing that also does policy and advocacy work is so, so amazing. What issues are you really focused on currently?
So that, like the mission of the group, is constantly evolving based on the messages that we receive through the group. And we're so thankful for the participants being willing within our group. And we've worked really hard to create a community that feels like a space where you can share and you're not going to be criticized and there's just going to be support. And we've worked very, very hard to make that community like that. And because of it, we get stories in from our members that help to guide us in deciding on policy. And then also we try to take in, I'm thankfully with my insomnia, I'm constantly reading articles, looking at, where is the legal profession going? Where are we seeing improvements? Where are we continuing to see challenges? And I'm sure it will not be surprising to you or any of your listeners that we still know there's a pay gap. So pay equity is something that we're working on. And, we have members in our group that will share a story about finding out that somebody else that based on their assessment of the facts where they work or how their pay structure is supposed to work at their position, that they're making less than a coworker who's male. And they find that out and share that story with us. And so we know it from a research perspective that pay equity is an issue. But then we also hear the stories and how it's impacted our members and then the members' responses to that. And it just makes trying to do advocacy work so much more personal when you're seeing it from both sides. So pay equity is certainly an issue that's of great importance to us across the profession. It obviously does not only impact mothers, but part of when I was talking earlier about speaking about motherhood penalty, part of what we know is that there is still a large bias towards women with children that can add an extra layer of bias for women when negotiating for pay. Deep down at our core, many of us have still been socialized, men and women, to believe that women are the caregiver or the primary caregiver. And as the caregiver, that we have less need for being also the breadwinner. But we know that's not how society works today. So we have to continue to make people aware of that bias and how that bias then impacts pay in a way that even goes beyond the gender gap that we already know exists. So pay equity is certainly one big policy issue. And then other policy issues that we think are really important are providing breastfeeding accommodations. We think that's an important message because that's an area where, first of all, it's imminently solvable. Providing a space for a woman to be able to pump breast milk or breastfeed her baby at a conference is easy. There's no reason why it shouldn't be done. So we think that that is a particular structural barrier that women who choose to breastfeed can face at such a critical time in their both parenting and career, because often they're going to be, this is a stereotypical age, but they're going to be in sort of that 5th to 6th year of law practice. They're really ramping up in their career. They're taking on this very time-consuming role as a parent, as a mom in breastfeeding. And we feel like that's a really important place where we can insert some support and say, you are welcomed here. And by making sure conferences, courthouses, if you're going to a opposing counsel's office for a deposition, that people need to be aware of and support women who are breastfeeding when they are lawyers. So that's another policy issue. Another policy issue that is incredibly important to us is paternity leave. Clearly, maternity leave is very important, and we haven't won that battle yet, although we have seen, particularly in larger firms, we see a lot more support for paid maternity leave. And even in firms where they have the policy that says paternity leave, what we hear over and over again is that men believe that taking paternity leave is career suicide. That's literally the words that have been said to me, career suicide, that actually taking paternity leave will impact their career. And yet women are more in a position where they need to take maternity leave. It is something that is more, and it's also become more accepted, but that shifts the stigma back to women when they take it. And again, it reinforces this idea that women are caregivers and men are providers. And that isn't how our society works today. And that message hurts not only the moms, but also the dads. And I think our younger dads, particularly, are not willing to sit with that idea. And I hope that we're going to see a big shift in that with our younger generation.
When you talk through those issues, it's just, for me, so eye-opening, because I had a very gilded, blessed experience through the first, I don't know how many years have I been practicing now, 8-9 years of practice. I've always had really supportive people around me. I've always had access to maternity leave. I had a wonderful flex time program. I always had access to places for me to pump. The men I worked with all took their paternity leave. So I think sometimes people don't realize how much of an issue it still is. But on the flip side, they don't realize that there is hope. I think for those people who don't have access to those things, they think that is something that's wrong with the law, as opposed to a change that needs to occur in their workplace. These are issues that have garnered a lot of interest. We're nowhere near solving the problem across the board, not even close. But there's been a lot of movement, which I think has been exciting to see.
I love hearing about your experience because it just makes me so happy to hear the experiences that some people are having. Even just this weekend, I ran into a colleague who's an in-house counsel position, and she was saying she has 18 weeks paid maternity leave. She has a huge team of very supportive coworkers that she's going to be going back to. She feels very confident that if she goes back and asks for support for pumping while traveling or just really anything that she needs, she feels she's going to be supported. They have childcare on site at the employer where she works. So I love hearing those stories because I want to have hope for people who are working through it, that there can be structural changes that can be made and that we are moving in that direction. But I do also recognize that particularly, it may be geographical or maybe firm by firm, but there's still work to be done, but we are seeing people taking positive steps.
Absolutely. It's so interesting because sometimes I don't like to talk about it because I do feel guilty that I was able to take 18 weeks maternity leave twice, paid leave.
Fantastic.
I was able to nurse both my kids for over 2 years. It was never an issue. It was a non-issue for me. That being said, since you do spend a lot of time thinking about these issues and getting to talk to women about these issues, and men, presumably, about these issues, are there things you're hearing that aren't getting the attention they deserve? Are there issues kind of bubbling under the surface that people aren't really talking about?
I think the concern that bothers me more than anything else it's not a particular issue per se. It is this still consistent message that women need to change to fit into the system.
Yep.
That is something that bothers me that I think lingers constantly under the surface. I do think we are starting to hear, frankly, for a little while, I felt that we weren't talking about motherhood enough. That was part of why MothersEsquire started, because when I went to look around, I just couldn't find resources, even from the entities that were in the law that were talking about women's issues. It seemed to me that when you would read those issues, you would read those, statistical studies or research reports that there weren't that many mentions of motherhood and the motherhood penalty. And I still have a hard time finding research in the legal profession that really gets to that issue. So I do still think there's room for us to grow in looking at the motherhood penalty and the fatherhood bonus and those kinds of things in the legal profession. But if I were to get to a core message that I think is super important, it is that there needs to be structural change in the legal profession. We do not need to keep selling programs telling women how to fix themselves.
Amen.
We do not need more speakers about how to negotiate better or dress. Not that those topics aren't important. I don't mean to undermine the idea that we should all grow and change and develop and learn. And I think that's great. But the fear I have is that tone that just lies right under the surface that says, women, the reason you're not succeeding is because something's wrong with you. Not, this is hard because this system was built in a different time in our society and a different cultural set of expectations, and that system has not caught up with where we are today, where many women in their families are breadwinners. Many women in their families are single mothers. Many fathers don't want to be the 90-hour-a-week worker in their family. There are a lot of changes to families that have occurred, but the workplace, particularly the legal workplace, hasn't really caught up, in my opinion, at least not in many places. But it's so refreshing and exciting to hear people like you talk about having that great experience, because the more we say that, the more normalized it becomes, and the more other firms say, oh, well, of course, that's the way it's supposed to be.
When you talk about the issue of the impact of women being the ones to change, the thing that comes up for me is the burden on women, in addition to practicing and parenting and all the other things, is now having, it's not just like the having to change, it's all the conferences and reading the books and doing the things. Like, there are entire conference sessions around teaching women how to be different. Like, do men sit around and have like group sessions, and are there leadership conferences around how men could be better allies? Like,
one of the things that I say a lot of times is that I have a slide where I take all these articles that say, about how women can negotiate better and how women don't have pay equity because they don't negotiate well enough, and books that talk about that. And then I take that slide and I literally have in my little PowerPoint scribble, I change the title of it to be focused on why men should change. And sometimes I will take a conference that has that women tone, and I will mark out the word women or an article heading that, like, women should do this in order to succeed in the law. And I'll strike out women, I'll put men, and I'll post it in our group and say, how does this sound when we replace women with men? And it just sounds ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous because we don't talk to men that way. We don't expect men to change. We expect women to change to fit into a male sort of cultural society of work.
Yep.
And we've got to stop doing that to women, and women have to not internalize that message.
Yes. You can't see me, but I'm cupping my hands around my mouth saying yes into the microphone. Because I hear women, especially young attorneys, who say things that I'm surprised. I don't expect to hear it from young attorneys, because my hope is that a younger generation has a different perspective. And you touched on this previously. I think you see more men who are interested in being more engaged in their family lives and in their marriages and their personal lives, who aren't looking to be that, 1950s workaholic type male figure.
Right.
But have you actually seen that prove out in any of kind of the research you've seen or the conversations you're having? Have you actually seen that there's a younger generation that feels differently and that that's having any sort of impact?
It's funny when I talk about MothersEsquire, I try to talk about it all the time because I want to talk to any lawyer that I know. And I talk to a lot of men, and the younger men that I talk to will say things to me like they just feel, you can just see how concerned they are, frankly, about the expectations around what they are supposed to be versus what they want to be. And just recently had a conversation with a man who said he had quit practicing law and went to an in-house counsel role because he wanted to be more involved with his family. And, I had a gentleman that I know say to me, taking paternity leave is career suicide. And I couldn't do it. And I really regret it. I've even had older attorneys say to me, looking back, I wish I would have spent more time with my kids. I wish that would have been something that I saw as important because, now my kids are grown. I do think there's an evolving of the culture. Another thing that's really interesting is that there have been more lawsuits by men saying that the failure to provide equal paternity leave is unfair and that you cannot do that and that it's discrimination. So I think it's evolving. I think we still have a lot of societal shift that has to occur, but I think the younger men are going to make this change. I think younger men and younger women both are going to push the workforce to change in ways that are going to make the workplace better for women.
For everybody. But yeah.
For everybody.
So have you seen anything or have you heard anything? I've sat on a couple of panels in the last year and moderated a couple of panels, and it comes up, but I never gotten a satisfactory answer around the Me Too movement and kind of how that has or hasn't really touched the legal profession. What have you seen?
I always find that so interesting. I will tell you, I have personally interacted with someone who told me that because of his religious beliefs that he could not go to lunch alone with me.
Okay, well.
And he was a colleague, and he was not in a superior position to me. So I did not see it as impacting my upward trajectory. But had that person been in a superior role to me, where I would have looked to him, because we were in the same practice group, had that person been in a superior position to me, that would have been a concern, because I would have felt that I wasn't able to go to him to, get the same kind of interaction and the same kind of opportunities that my male colleagues would have, because he didn't want to be seen alone with me. And I don't in any way mean to be disrespectful, but his belief system it's really tied to that Me Too idea, because his belief system was, I shouldn't be alone with a woman. And that was very troubling to me, because he was willing to say it to me. And I worry about who's out there who's not willing to talk about it, who's not willing to be that direct about it, but who is not going to take the same time or be willing to meet with me in a way that is going to impact my career, because they don't want to be seen alone with me. They wouldn't want to travel to see a client with me, that kind of thing. So I do worry about what's lurking under the surface with that. And it's frustrating to me to know that we've finally gotten to a point where women are able to stand up and talk about this, and that many, many, many people are taking sexual harassment in the workforce, and they are taking the changes that we need to make so seriously and want to be so careful about it. And yet some people are taking that message and twisting it into a way that then ends up unintentionally harming women again. So that is a worry for me. And I don't know the answer to that, but it is something that I have confronted personally.
It's so interesting, kind of the repercussions of, so much. There's just so many things at play there. Because the thing I think about is, at one point I was working at a firm where a partner had a poker game. This is like so cliche. And I have always spoken my mind. That's not something that I've ever had trouble with. And it was not that he didn't invite women to the poker game. It's that there wasn't very many women who were interested in participating in the poker game. It was like cigars and poker, and it was like so cliche, right? And
right.
So the conversation I had with him was that it's not, what is his obligation as a manager and leader in the firm to create those equal opportunities? I'm not saying he can't have the poker game. I'm saying, how intentional and conscious are you creating that same environment and opportunity for connection with people who are not at that game? And I think that's where I find that men are unwilling to do the extra work.
Yes, so accurate. And even if it's not an unwillingness, it is a lack of perception of what is going on. I have two very interesting, I've seen very similar scenarios to what you're talking about, the cigar smoking, but two other examples that come to mind for me that are very in keeping with that example are, one is that there's certain golfing or the clubs where it's really very male oriented. And so you don't really, maybe people know that if they join certain clubs or do certain things or play at certain golf clubs, they know they're going to have the chance to interact with senior partners because they're there. And that opportunity is just not the same for women. And you would feel very out of place. And I've seen those kinds of things play out. I have a really funny story about something that was unintentional, certainly, but was so kind of embarrassing for me that when I was a summer associate, I was the only female summer associate, and there was a practice group that held this cocktail party at a local restaurant that also has an art gallery attached with the restaurant. And so I was the only female summer associate, and this was an all-male department, and we met at this restaurant with this art gallery. They had set up sort of our little area where we were all going to stand around drinking cocktails under this particular art display that happened to be a huge display of breasts. Like, it was pictures of breasts and just picture after picture. There must have been 40 pictures of breasts
oh my God.
on the wall. And I mean, yes, and your response, like, it's hilarious. And yet I'm the only woman there, and I'm standing there with this whole group of men and under these big pictures of breasts and just feeling incredibly awkward. And, again, totally unintentional, not something that they did on purpose. And yet it was sort of that lack of awareness that we are standing under this huge display of boobs, and I am the only woman in the group. It was very awkward and very uncomfortable. And of course, I have a really good sense of humor. We laughed it off. We moved on. But just, I think that kind of silly example, when you extrapolate that out to the everyday kinds of examples of interactions or places or marketing activities or business development plans, baseball tickets, and so much of that, which tends to be male dominated, tends to put women at a disadvantage. And yet that is what has been traditional. So we keep doing what's been traditional, and we don't branch out into things where women are going to be more empowered to be in a place where they're comfortable. Not that there aren't plenty of women who love sports. It's just that's sort of been the traditional mode, and we keep going that way, and we're not being aware of other places where we can empower women to have the same opportunities as our male colleagues.
To your point, it is more complex than that, right? Like, it's not like there's a bad guy. Like, it's much easier if we think of these partners or these people who are perpetuating these things or doing these things as being malicious. But because I know that there are people listening who practice at that firm and they know what partner I'm talking about, he was actually a really great partner. He was very supportive. He made sure that both maternity leaves and both pregnancies, we had a very good line of communication around what I was able to take on work-wise. And so he said, I'm not going to make any assumptions about what you want to do with your career. You tell me if you want more or less work at any point, and I'll make sure that happens for you.
Fantastic.
You know what I mean? And so that there was like a level of an awareness there around the types of conversations he was supposed to be having. But then in this other area, he just fell short. So I only say that because people are nuanced and people are complex, and it's not as simple as he was terrible and like, why did they let someone like him, be in charge of, give him money to like do programming at the firm. He was really great about it in other ways. And that takes me to like the next thing that I think comes up a lot is that there is this whole focus on motherhood and parenting. And so in my group, there was just two of us who started my year, and I got married and had kids early, and she was single the entire time we worked together. And so sometimes it felt like we were pitted against each other.
Yeah.
Because it felt like I was automatically given the option of going on a flexible work schedule as a third-year associate because I had a child as a third-year associate. And she was like, how am I ever going to have a child when I have never have time to date anybody because I am here all the freaking time. Yeah. And she's like, she's now very married and having her first child actually in a couple of months. So everything worked out for her and she's very happy. But her point is a fair one. Do you know what I mean? Like, we still haven't figured out how to have this conversation around the respect that all lawyers' lives deserve. And it's almost like we put parenting on this pedestal. And so it deserves discussion because it is this clear delineation of like this other thing that needs to be addressed, right? Whereas we feel like people going to drinks with their friends is like an option, or people like dating is an option, or people wanting to be able to like sleep 10 hours a night is like an option. So we're not really having the full conversation about like wellness. And how do you think about that? Because that's the thing I always worry about when we focus too much around these policies to protect parents and which I think are so important, is how do we make sure that people who have no interest in being parents or interest in even being married also feel like they're not going to end up picking up the slack, because I know that's how some people feel.
Right.
While lawyers are just gallivanting at home and like playing at the playground.
Absolutely. It's oh my gosh, it is so important to talk about this issue. So one thing that I would say right off the bat, and I always bring this up when I'm giving presentations to groups and I'm talking about the motherhood penalty, is that bias towards mothers, research has shown that gets placed on women who are of age to have children, whether they have indicated repeatedly that they don't want to have children or not, that penalty, that bias is still directed at all women, because people make an assumption that even if you say, I don't ever want to have kids, that you still will, that you will change your mind and that you want to have kids. And so I think it's important for all women that we address motherhood penalty, because we do know that it gets placed on all women's shoulders, again, even if they've clearly communicated that children are not in their future. So that's one thing that I think is important to think about with that, is that when we are really doing it for everybody. Another thing is going to that word that you said earlier, which is wellness, because when I think about this, I had one of my favorite colleagues she's single, no kids, and that was sort of her plan. She had a four-legged baby that she adores, and she was also an Ironman athlete. And so that part of her life was really important for her. And I feel like we are talking about with Mothers Esquire is just one piece of an overall wellness pie that we need to be talking about as a profession over and over again, because I do agree that picking up the slack mentality gets shifted. I do think that happens. I think that there is that sense of, well, they're young and they don't have kids yet and they can take on this extra assignment. I think that hurts people who do have kids, because I think their career doesn't elevate as fast. I think people see a career advantage in that, but I do think they see that at the detriment of their own personal goals or their own personal wellness and self-care that they need to be pursuing. And I think that's why we see burnout. That's why we see a lot of the issues that lawyers have in terms of depression and drug abuse and those kinds of things. And so I think we never want this conversation that we're having with Mothers Esquire to pit lawyers against each other. We just believe that we are one part of an overall wellness conversation.
That's so good. And I think I love that you kind of appreciate the importance of that conversation. And I don't want this to be a, not all men type of I understand that's the community that you serve, and that's the issue that you're trying to address. And I think the intersectionality of it is really that it affects all women, and then it affects men who want to be parents. So it's not just mothers. It really does impact so many lawyers, whether or not they think they're part of the conversation. Absolutely.
And I sometimes will say, we picked the name Mothers Esquire, but truly that is a misnomer, because what we really want to think about is caregiving lawyers, and that caregiving can be really broadly defined. And so sometimes caregiving is caregiving for children as a mother. Sometimes caregiving is being a father. Sometimes caregiving is an elderly parent or a pet or ourselves and, our athletic ambitions. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which we are caregivers. And we think Mothers Esquire focuses on some really specific issues that affect moms and dads. But I think it is a broader concept of that we are in our lives caregivers too, and that work cannot take over that caregiving role to such an extreme, which law can do. I have this great analogy that one of my coworkers told me one time that said that if you pour liquid onto a table, it will cover the entire table if you let it. And work is like that as well. If you let it, it will cover, and it will cover as much surface as you will grant it. In order for us to have healthy, productive lives, whatever we want that healthy, productive personal life to include, you have to be able to limit work to some parts of life and give yourself the permission to be a caregiver to whomever you need to caregive for.
Yep. And I think that the part of the point that you were making there that I want to highlight is that when people choose to leverage, for example, if they know that their colleague is out on leave, so they take advantage of the fact that they're out, they're doing themselves a disadvantage, because they're perpetuating a system that says you can get ahead from someone else taking time for themselves. So that means that when they want to take care of themselves, when they want to pursue that personal project, whether it is something as ambitious as an athletic endeavor, which has never been my strong suit, or something,
mine either.
Something more chill like Netflix, a regular Netflix habit, they can expect their college to return the favor because that's the culture that they are accepting.
Right.
And that comes from a scarcity mindset, and that comes from a fear mindset, right? That comes from a belief that it can't be better than this and it can't be different than this. And so you just have to take advantage when you can.
Right. And just nobody benefits from that mindset. So I think that creating an environment and a culture where people know that self-care is important is going to benefit everybody.
So we've touched on this a little bit already. And I think for me, this is such a core part of this movement and like the ability to create change in the institutions is I think that there are a lot of tough conversations people need to be having. And we talk a lot in principle, right? We talk at high level about what needs to happen, but day to day, I don't know that people are having the conversations they need to be having within their workplace, both with their colleagues and with the people they work for. Do you have any suggestions for the types, like for example, the conversation that I had with the partner of the firm, I think that was an amazing conversation for him to initiate with me, right? To say at a time when I was 6 months pregnant, congratulations, he was the partner who was in charge of assignment distribution. So we had regular cadence around meeting around my workload because I was a second year associate at that time. And he just said very plainly, I get that you're going through this and I'm really excited for you. I'm not going to make any assumptions. Let me know. Let's talk and let's continue to communicate if you feel like it's too much or too little. And then we can take it from there. And I probably wouldn't have and I probably wouldn't have thought or known how to have that conversation at that time. I was basically like, I'm having a baby, law firm be damned, like I'm doing me. And what other types of conversations do you think, whether it's around your own maternity leave, and of course, I'm not saying like negotiate for yourself. Like I think that that's been said many, many times. I think there's more nuance to it than that.
Absolutely. And I think that when one of the values, sort of stepping aside from the question that you're asking specifically, but one of the values that I think MothersEsquire brings is that for many people, it still surprises me, but for many people, there's not a maternity leave policy in place at their firm and they don't know what to ask for. So we really encourage people to join MothersEsquire before they have that first baby, because we want you to have a community when you say, the firm is asking me what I need, I don't know. And they'll get 150 comments saying, be sure to ask for this, check on this. And one of the things we're trying to do as we evolve as a group is to develop policy outlines or, fact sheets or guidance for these kinds of questions that seem to come up repeatedly. Like you said, it is nuanced because there's so many factors that go into decisions like that, like the size of the firm, the location of the firm, your type of practice. It's very hard to create a one-size-fits-all solution for that. But I do think that's one of the values that MothersEsquire brings, is that community of collective support and guidance and knowledge and experience that can help somebody go through something like that and help her know what questions to ask and who she needs to talk to. And I know there are some really important conversations we need to have at work. And first of all, as another aside, I would be curious if your partner, as awesome and terrific as his question to you was, and the fact that he didn't make assumptions, which is one of my key talking points, don't make assumptions about a woman after she has a baby and what she wants out of her practice. Ask her. Don't decide for her that she doesn't want to travel to a meeting because she has a new baby. Ask her. Let her give you the answer. My question, though, would be, did he also ask that or give that same option to the males who had babies?
Yes. So, and that's what I said. So I was very intentional around picking a group in which most people were parents. All the partners were parents. It was 50-50 female male partners in the group. So I felt it was my best shot, right? Like you can't know anything with certainty, but I felt like it was my best shot to get people who understood and valued family. And he did have similar conversations with the male attorneys. To be fair, none of the male attorneys had, and it's kind of an age thing also. Like I feel like the male attorneys tend to have kids later in their careers. Like I was very junior. Mm-hmm. So none of my peers were having kids at the time, but all of the senior associates while I was there who had kids, all of the partners while I was there who had kids took all of their leave.
I think that's just incredible to hear. And I just want to keep hearing more stories like that, that the men are taking their leave, that they're being given the leave in the first place, and then they're actually taking it, and then we're creating a social culture within the legal employment, whether it's a firm or an in-house counsel, where they can take it, because I think that's going to make a big difference. If I could go back to your point about tough conversations, I would like to kind of also think about tough conversations outside of the workforce, because we clearly do need to have conversations within the workforce, and that's so driven by the type of place that you work that I don't know that I have a good blanket sort of answer to that. Where I do think we need to have tough conversations is at home with our partner, if we have a partner, with our support system, whoever that may be. You know, my husband and I are both from different cities, and where we live, we don't have any family located nearby. So we knew that between the two of us, we were going to have to really be a team and rely on each other. And there was a lot of negotiating. I am Southern, you know, like I said, I'm from Kentucky. I'm Southern. And, you know, there was still this mentality, these tapes that were playing in my head about what my role was as a wife and as a mother. And that I'm supposed to be the one cooking dinner and doing the laundry and doing the dishes. And, you know, my husband's job gave him more flexibility. So I was having tough conversations with myself, frankly, about reminding myself that there is nothing about me that makes me inherently better at doing laundry than my husband. The fact that I am female does not mean it is my job to do the laundry. And again, it was just part of those cultural tapes that had been wired into me growing up, sort of the way that I did. But it took some time, and there was negotiation back and forth with us about, you know, who's going to do what and how we're going to work it out. And, you know, I think it's made us closer. It's made us a better team, but it wasn't something that just instantly happened, and then we both instantly accepted how our partnership was going to work as two people who both have jobs and two people who are raising kids together. So I think that's really important. And I think it was really great that he and we had some of those conversations before kids. Looking back, could we have had more? Yes, we could have. So I think that having those conversations early and often is really important, and continuing to have them throughout your parenting partnership is super important. Whoever your parenting partner is, maybe your parenting partner is your parents because you're a single parent. Whoever that is, having those conversations and talking about that. I also think having conversations with social entities that you interact with about gender roles is really important. And let me explain what I mean. At schools, at churches, at other community groups, there continue to be this whole list of unpaid labor that still gets shifted to women repeatedly. And I think some schools and community organizations and churches are doing a really good job at identifying that. Like, I've talked some within MothersEsquire about the fact that it seems that I've seen a lot of and heard a lot of stories about women being 95% of the volunteers at school in the PTA or any kind of parent-teacher association group, and doing all the volunteer jobs, and that men tend to take on the coaching jobs, but the day-to-day, like, sort of, you know, unflattering, not fun sort of work that needs to get done gets shifted to women. And so there's all of those expectations that I think need to be shifted, both internally, talking to yourself about what's important to you, thinking about kind of an example. I've always felt that being involved in my kids' school was important, but I would say to myself, what opportunity is going to give me the chance to both volunteer, because I felt that it was important for me to do that, but also to actually get to interact with my kid. So I could choose to go do a volunteer activity that would have me away from my kids, or I could choose to do the activity that was going to let me, go serve lunch, for example, where I'm going to get to see my kid and interact with them. And so I started trying to consciously shift the volunteer work that I was doing into things that were going to allow me to interact with my kids, because that was where I was in my life now. So I think there are a lot of tough conversations that we can have, but the ones outside of work are just as important as the ones that we're having at work.
I am so happy that you brought that up. That is such a good point. And so my husband is the primary caregiver for our children, and that's a conversation we had probably too early for him, but I I've always known what I want. I think we had the conversation before we even started dating. So when I say early, I mean early. And before we had kids, we always knew that he was going to be the primary caregiver. And both my kids are in school this year. They're both in preschool. And despite the number of times we have explained to them that he is the primary caregiver, he works from home. He is at home all day long. I have a job. And when my son is sick, they still call me first.
They still call you.
And I'm not even on the emergency contact sheet. So they have to physically go to the directory and look up my number.
It's so true. It's so true. We still have so many. Yeah, there's so many societal sort of expectations. I always say, I feel like my husband could never show up for a single doctor's appointment, school conference, anything like that, any of those kind of dentist appointment. He could never show up for any of those things and nobody would think twice about it. They would just make an assumption that he was at work and couldn't make it. The flip side is not true. I do not think it's true. And, to the point of school calling, which, by the way, they also always call me. There is a great story about Ruth Bader Ginsburg that you probably know, but that they called her. They would call her at work, and she finally got fed up one day because I think she was in the middle, just in the middle of doing something awesome, as she would be doing, of course. Yep. And she said, "My son has two parents alternate calls." And she just told the school, frankly, you need to, I am not the only parent in this situation. And I think the more we can move towards these social institutions, understanding that both parents are parents, that is also going to, again, have that impact of supporting women in their careers.
Yes. So while I could talk about this forever, I'm going to transition us to the second segment of the show. So this is the segment that I call the Happiness Hot Seat. And these are just a round of quick fire questions that I like to know about people that I think will help my audience better create happiness in their own lives.
Okay.
So, number one, how do you manage overwhelm?
So, big thing, meditation. I love to listen to YouTube, hypnosis, guided meditation, guided hypnosis. And I do a lot of positive self-talk.
Sorry, on this YouTube thing, do you have a favorite channel, or do you just look up guided,
research hypnosis? I just research whatever I'm doing. So if I'm going to be flying, I research, guided meditations on flying. If I'm going to be speaking, guided meditations on, having a good speaking engagement. Sometimes I have trouble with migraine headaches, so I'll listen to guided meditations on migraines. Whatever my issue is, I will search for something. I've put on a couple pounds lately, so I've been listening to the guided meditations on weight loss. Whatever it is, I just feel like it's very helpful to me. It's a way that I manage, sort of that tape in my head that's constantly playing my to-do list.
I love that. And I've never thought, so Audible has these free guided meditations as well. And my favorite one is the morning meditations for daily magic. Anyone who knows me knows I'm obsessed with that word. I've never thought about using YouTube, and I'm on YouTube all the time. I love YouTube. So that's a wonderful tip.
And I like this guy named Michael Seeley. I don't know why, but I just really like his voice. And so he's one that I like to listen to.
I know the name, and I don't know from where, probably from a meditation. He probably does a lot of meditation.
Yeah, such a good thing to do for yourself.
So in addition to meditation, number two, how do you prioritize your own happiness?
So it took me a long time to get there, but I came to realize that I have to do things that bring me personal fulfillment. I am a mission-driven person. I have to do something that makes me feel like I have a mission to give to others. And so I always keep inspirational quotes around, and it's the one about, her name has gone right out of my head when I'm trying to think of it, but we cannot all, it's Mother Teresa. We cannot all do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And that's how I prioritize my own happiness, is what little thing can I do that's going to make somebody else's life better. And and that's what Mother's Esquire is to me.
I love that. Number 3, can you describe a mindset shift that changed your life?
Yes. And I'm going to go back to that example I said earlier, which is funny because you mentioned too about how you get surprised when you hear people saying, internalizing the sense of failure or internalizing negative messages about themselves. There was a clear moment where I stopped saying, I'm an A+ person doing a C job at everything. And I started saying, I'm an A+ person living within a system that wasn't built for me. So I stopped internalizing, the idea of leaning in is really good. And I don't mean to take away from the lean in concept. I think there are a lot of things about that are good, not to sort of willingly put yourself in a back seat, not to willingly sit against the wall rather than at the table. There are a lot of things about that message that are positive and that are worth listening to. But when you lean into a brick wall and you wonder why you're not getting to the other side, at some point in time, you have to stop. You can't blame yourself because you are leaning, right? But there's a brick wall in your way. At some point in time, we have to take down the brick wall. So I think it's shifting that mindset from internalizing a sense of failure to looking at what systems are stopping me from succeeding and how can I tackle them.
That's such a good one. And I think that situating yourself within the system and taking away the self-blame is so important. We're all just doing the best we can, and that's enough.
We are. Right. And I do. And I hear so many people saying that, just recently I was talking to a lot of the Mothers Esquire members will contact me personally through phone or Facebook or whatever. And I just recently, this woman said to me, I just feel like such a failure. I just feel like such a failure. And I'm going to go do this other thing because I just feel like I failed. You didn't fail. System failed you. And, but I just kept repeating that to her because she just kept saying over and over, I just feel like such a failure. And I want, and when I give presentations, I just gave a presentation last Friday. And I said, if there's one message you walk away from this with, it is that I want you to not internalize this message that you need to change, that you are the reason why you are seeing stumbling blocks in your career, progression in your career trajectory. I want you to see the system that you're living in and see if, there's extra hurdles that you are having to jump over that perhaps a colleague isn't, and how can we tackle those hurdles?
Absolutely. Number 4, can you name a book that has inspired you on your journey?
I have a very favorite book, and it is by Anne-Marie Slaughter, and it is called Unfinished Business. And I really recommend it to everybody. There was a time in the early development of Mothers Esquire and the early development of what we were going to be and where we were going, where I'd read enough that I had all these ideas and thoughts swirling in my head. And I love stuff by Joan Williams. She's done such great work. There's a lot of work out of Stanford's gender equality or gender studies group. There was all of this material that was sort of just floating around in my head that was not organized or categorized into a sort of an organized fashion. And I read Anne-Marie Slaughter's book and I said, it is just like somebody has walked 10 miles in my head and put everything on paper. So she just put everything in this organized fashion that I've been thinking and reading and understanding and trying to, get my arms around. And it made such a difference for me. I recommend it to everybody to read, especially men, and especially men who are lawyers, because Anne-Marie Slaughter is a lawyer, is a dean of a law school, and went through a personal experience that really changed the way that she looked at motherhood and the law and caregiving in the law. And she talks a lot about a culture of care. And just all of the themes of the book are so on point with everything we've talked about today and everything that Mothers Esquire aims to do. And I love her and I love that book.
Is the book at all related to her infamous Atlantic article?
Yes. And I'm glad you brought that up. So, of course, people love to do social media battles and all of this. And so there's the sense of like, we've pitted Sheryl Sandberg against Anne-Marie Slaughter and Lean In against Unfinished against that Atlantic article, because of the Atlantic article was a bit of a response to this idea of lean in. And I say, let's don't say, let's don't pit these ideas against each other, but let's say both and. And so when Anne Marie Slaughter wrote that Atlantic article, apparently she got so much feedback from it, which I'm not surprised, but she got so much feedback from it that she felt that she needed to write a whole book about it. So it takes the ideas and the general themes that ran through that Atlantic article and put it into a whole book form. So just with a lot more substance to it than you could ever fit into a short article. So it's definitely something I think everybody should read. And then if you have the chance to read it, I know you only asked me about one, but there was a book that just came out last year by Joanne Lippman called That's What She Said. And that's what's called in the U.S. It has a different name in Europe for some reason. So anyway, it's called That's What She Said in the U.S. And reminds me, it's almost like Anne Marie Slaughter's book, like the next version of that. It's like it's like you almost need to read the two together because they just complement each other so beautifully.
Amazing. I'm going to include links to all of that in the show notes, including the Atlantic article, which I believe was called Why Women Still Can't Have It All, if my memory serves.
Yes,
but
that's exactly right.
I remember reading that article because Anne Marie Slaughter had actually just come and spoken, if I'm remembering correctly. My timelines get confused now. But I think she had just come and spoken at a law school class when the article came out, and nobody wanted to talk about the law school stuff. Everyone wanted to talk about the article.
Everybody wanted to talk about the article. Yeah, of course.
But she's so interesting and such a dynamic person and has such a wide array of scholarly writing. Like she just writes on so many things so eloquently.
Yes, and this book is no exception. And I love that she talks personally about the fact that first of all, she talks about the fact that she and her husband have taken on different gender roles than the typical gender role because her husband had been more of the hands-on caregiver. And then particularly while she was serving in government, that she was living away from the family. And she talks about the fact that her teenage son was having some challenges and that she kind of just got to a point where she really felt that she needed to choose between continuing on in this career path that she had planned and being an hands-on, living with her family mother that she wanted to be, and like how that challenged her own sense of self and the sense of what society, the sort of dual messages that we give to women in society, like you should be an active career woman and have it all, but you should also be a stay-at-home mom and bake cookies, and you should constantly be at school volunteering. And, it's just this whole mixture of messages and how she filtered through that to make a decision about what she thought was best for her and her family.
Awesome. I'm excited to add it to my list. I love to read, so I will definitely be adding both those books. Last question. Number 5, what do you think separates happy lawyers from lawyers who struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree?
I'm going to circle back to the question you asked about prioritizing your own happiness. And I think that lawyers who find purpose and meaning will be happier lawyers. And so for some people, I think they find purpose and meaning, today in today's society, if you're an immigration lawyer and you are able to be on the front lines and making a difference in the lives of children, or you're doing work that's policy driven that you just inspires you, perhaps you're a professor. And, if you're doing the kind of work, or you just absolutely love corporate law and doing that great deal just gives you such purpose in life. If those things give you purpose, then I think that's great. If they don't, and I will tell you, I love IP law. I adore my clients. It's so interesting. It's so fun to talk about. It's very intellectually stimulating. But can I say it is a mission-based practice for me, or that it brings me purpose? Not exactly. And so finding MothersEsquire for me was the thing that gave me purpose and gave me a mission that I could put my heart into. And that is when I really felt like I flipped a switch in my practice and in my life of feeling really, really happy that not only do I get to do a practice that I do think is very interesting, but that I have a place of being able to contribute to others' lives in a way that's really meaningful to me, and as they say to me, meaningful to them too. And that's when I really became a happy lawyer.
Beautifully said. And I think it really highlights the point you made earlier about not pitting versions of ourselves against each other. It can be both and.
Yeah. Right.
You can have a practice that's intellectually stimulating but doesn't fulfill you purposefully, but also have this non-monetized kind of purpose-driven mission, and they both can coexist and they can both be enough and they can both create a whole picture of your life. You don't have to force one thing to be everything.
Right. And, it's so amazing how these things tend to complement each other, even when that was never an intention. So I have met the most amazing and interesting lawyers across the country who sometimes I will reach out to and say, Amy, I have this question for you about this particular kind of law. Do you have a second to help me? And she says, absolutely, Michelle, I'll be happy to help you with that. Or, I'm coming out of town and somebody welcomes me to have lunch with them while I'm there. And, or I get a referral for a new client matter through the group, so it ends up complementing they just tend to build upon each other, I think, over time, if you create space in your life for that to happen.
Amazing. I keep trying to not add on, but I just want to add one small thing. For people out there who feel so stretched thin at their job, I think sometimes it's hard to believe that you have the energy, but I think you would agree that when you find that other thing that complements what you're doing, it energizes you, and it, to your point, complements what you're already doing. So it's not like it's sucking time and creating two different streams of work. And it's worth the investment, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. Because I know that there are a lot of people out there who hear what you're saying and they're like, to your point about, and the, kind of the conversation we were having earlier about you were feeling like you needed community because you were so overwhelmed with all the different things. And there was this thing that you were interested in doing and you found the time and you did the thing. And now it's created this whole other avenue for you to express yourself and to find purpose and to make an impact. And if you hadn't invested that time and taken that risk, you wouldn't have this. And so I just want to encourage people who are listening, if there is that thing inside of them that they want to pursue, you'll find the energy.
You will. You'll find the energy. You'll carve out the time. You'll integrate it into other parts of your life. You will find it to be something that you make time for and that you prioritize. And, and for me, I've actually decided consciously to be a slightly reduced billable hour partner at my firm because this is so important to me that I wanted to have extra time to devote to it. And, you don't have to do that because maybe you just put some strict boundaries around how much time you can invest in this other avenue of your life. But even if it's 10 minutes a week or 30 minutes on a weekend, if you can find the time to do something that brings you purpose, I think you will find that it gives you the energy. There's a great analogy about if you're trying to chop down a tree and you're constantly, chopping and chopping and chopping at the tree and your axe is getting dull, that it's going to take you twice as much time to do the same amount of work if you would do something that would sharpen that axe and then go back and try to chop down the tree again. So if you can find the thing that sharpens your axe, it's going to make you more efficient at your other work.
That's such a good analogy. I love it. So before we wrap up, the final segment of the show, I just want to quickly ask you one listener question that we received that I think could be a huge conversation. So I would just like to get kind of your high-level thoughts and some resources that you may have around this question. And it was a question from someone who wanted to remain anonymous, who messaged me on Instagram. And her question was around how to handle awkward advances in the work environment, especially when there's alcohol involved.
Right.
She was specifically speaking to the fact that she was at a firm event and someone did something. She's not even sure if she misinterpreted it, but
right.
She's not sure in those situations how she should handle it and whether there's anything she should be saying or doing to manage it.
And unfortunately, really the thing that we should be talking about is how that person should not be making awkward advances and that person should not be drinking to such a level at a party that they're doing things that are inappropriate and making their coworkers uncomfortable. So that's really where the conversation ought to be going. But unfortunately, it being pragmatic, we realize we have to figure out how can we navigate the system that we're in. I think that firms have a lot of responsibility for the kind of culture that they create in that, and that they ought to monitor more what's going on at parties, how much people are consuming of alcohol. I think there's a lot of that, which does not lead towards a healthy, wellness-focused firm, especially for younger people who, well, I shouldn't even say that because I think it kind of is across the board. So I think there are a lot of things, going back to the idea about fixing women versus fixing the system. I think there are a lot of systemic issues that need to be addressed in that. So I think to the extent that she feels comfortable to do so, she should go to the firm management and say, I felt uncomfortable with the situation at a party that was hosted by the firm. And can we think about some ways that we could stop this from happening at future events so that the firm can make system changes that will address that? Then in terms of how to deal with it personally, I think, I think it just all depends on the circumstances and that person, but clearly removing yourself from that situation as quickly as possible and think of any other ideas. Again, I just go back to this idea that we need to create a firm life where that isn't such an important part of our get-togethers, because I do think it leads to unfortunate situations happening where people are uncomfortable. But let me throw something else out there that is one of the things that the ABA has tried to do in introducing Model Rule 8.4G in the Professional Rules of Ethics, and that is to get specifically at the responsibility that both law firms and individual lawyers have in the kind of behavior that they engage in. So if they engage in harassing behavior, and in the notes to that rule specifically say, even at off property, outside of the law firm activities that are organized by the law firm, and that law firms have a responsibility to address that kind of behavior even in events that are happening outside of the law firm itself. And so I think that people are aware of that. We've got a long way to go, but that's what 8.4G was part of what it's trying to get at. And I think we need to keep looking at how can we address that from the firm level.
And do you think she needs to, assuming this person is not like a partner or senior, person to her, if this person is a peer, do you think she needs to say something to him directly?
I think if she can, and she feels comfortable with doing that, and she has thought through what, the repercussions to their relationship might be, I think it's always better we were talking about having tough conversations earlier, have that conversation with him to say, when we were at this party, this is what happened, go back to the thing that we tell our kids, I statements, usually I felt uncomfortable when you did X at this party. And, and I don't want to have that kind of interaction again. And I just want to clear the air, so something like that where she can address him, but she's going to be the one who's going to know best what his response is going to be, what kind of personality is going to be. Is he going to hold a grudge afterwards? Is he going to be, is she going to feel more uncomfortable around him, or does she feel like she can go to him based on his personality and clear the air and feel more comfortable that she set a boundary for herself? Because I think that's never a bad thing to set a boundary and to clearly communicate your needs and what your expectations are about how people treat you and how they behave. But I also just don't think that it's her responsibility to tell him how to behave. Like, he ought to know how to behave, and the firm ought to set up an environment where he doesn't have the temptation to behave in that inappropriate way. Does that make sense? Like, it shouldn't shift to her to be the one to tell him how to behave.
No, absolutely. But she doesn't owe him anything, right? Like, she doesn't owe him that conversation. But
if it would make her feel better, then, and she feels like that it would be a productive conversation, then absolutely, I think she should go to him and tell him what her expectations are about his behavior in the future.
Yep. No, I think that I couldn't have said it better. I don't know what I would have said if someone had asked me that question. I thought it was a really tough question. And so I'm happy to have had you on.
It is tough.
I mean, as lawyers, we know that it depends is kind of sometimes the answer to life's toughest questions.
Right. I've had older men particularly sort of make comments about my appearance, or put their arm around me, or do things like that, where the context of the situation was, even though it may not have been the most comfortable thing for me, to me, I felt like it wasn't something that was intentionally trying to make me uncomfortable. It was just a cultural sort of misunderstanding about what was probably most appropriate, but you just kind of have to judge from the circumstance about what you feel like you can do and can't do.
And that's where I get the most hung up, to be honest with you, is at times when I have a pretty high tolerance. So like nothing really bothers me. Obviously I say that with, people aren't treating me horribly, but I've had,
Right.
partners talk about like my yoga body. And I'm like, I don't even do yoga. I don't know what you're saying to me right now, like,
Yeah.
and so I always wonder what's my responsibility? Because I also know I'm someone who speaks my mind. So to the point we were making earlier, I don't owe them anything. Like they should know better. But then I'm like,
Right.
is it productive or helpful for me to say something on behalf of people who wouldn't say something in that situation, or like to prevent it from happening to someone else, and that's kind of where I, as a philosophy major, get really in the weeds on like my ethical responsibility and how I can have an impact and use my voice.
I'm with you. It's so context driven, and it's very hard to know. And I am also one who tends to speak up and tends to bring things to people's attention. And it's hard to know what to do. So I feel a lot of sympathy for people who are put in those situations, and feel like hopefully you are in a place where you can either directly confront the person, or you can talk to people who have power over that situation to change the way that the environment was set up so that it's not as likely to happen again.
And hopefully it's not a cultural thing. I mean, I think just no matter how good a culture is, I think where we are currently in our evolution as a society, I think you'll be hard pressed if the group is large enough to be able to create a culture where that you can eliminate that entirely, right? Like that's just not where we are yet culturally. And hopefully we get to a point where when that does happen, to your earlier point, it's the guy coming to her and saying, I'm sorry, that was completely unacceptable. I take full responsibility and, it won't happen again. And then we hopefully eventually evolve to a place where it just doesn't happen. But that's not today.
Not today. We're getting there.
Yep, we will. I'm hopeful and positive. I see lots of positive signs. So I try to focus on those and increase their impact in the world.
Yes.
Last thing, what's the best way for my listeners to follow you, to learn more about Mothers Esquire and get involved in the group?
So if you are a mom lawyer or to be mom lawyer, and that includes if you're in law school, and I will say too, we are very committed to supporting moms, whether they are currently a stay-at-home mom, currently working as a judge, a lawyer, private practice, solo, big firm, in-house, whatever, or you did law and now you're doing something else. Our group is open to anybody who is in any of those categories. And so you can go to our Facebook group. It's a closed group in Facebook. So it's a Facebook groups under Mothers Esquire, all one word. If you're not a mom lawyer, but you want to follow us, we do have a Facebook page. We're not super active there, but it's also under the name Mothers Esquire. You can also follow us on Twitter. And then we have a website, MothersEsquire.org or MothersEsquire.com, where you can see some of the work we're doing. And we are doing currently a series with Above the Law, where we post articles from different members of ours about issues that are particular to motherhood and the law.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for being on tonight and for this really amazing conversation.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody who listens in. I hope that you'll reach out to me or to the group and let us know if there's anything that we can do to support caregivers in the law.
Thanks so much for listening. And if you got value out of this episode and you think there's someone else who might enjoy it, I'd love for you guys to share. And if you have any questions for me, please head over to the website at thehappylawyerproject.com and you can leave me a voicemail right on the website. When you get there, you'll see a little tab on the right hand of the screen and you can click on it and leave a voicemail there. I absolutely love hearing from you guys. Last but not least, if you enjoy this podcast and you like the content that I'm bringing to you guys and you haven't done so already, I would really encourage you guys to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave me a rating and review. That's all for this week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening.